What if I told you that the guy who convinced Genghis Khan to stop slaughtering entire cities was a bookish scholar in flowing robes, someone who believed in paperwork over bloodshed? Picture standing in the tent of the world's most feared warrior and arguing for mercy. Wild, right? Stick around, because this is the story of Yelü Chucai, and trust me, you've never heard history like this. Let's set the scene. It's the early 13th century. The Mongol horde is sweeping across Asia like an unstoppable storm, and every city in their path falls under the shadow of annihilation. Enter a young Khitan scholar, barely out of his 20s, stepping into the glare of Mongol power. No armor, no sword, just ink, scrolls, and Confucian ideals. You might be thinking, why should I care about some medieval bureaucrat? Because, let's be honest, a guy who talks down Genghis Khan? That's binge-worthy gold. Imagine the crunch of camels' hooves on dusty roads, the roar of tents flapping in the wind, and the smell of roasting meat mingling with the ever-present tension of imminent violence. Now imagine a calm voice rising above it all, quoting ancient Confucian wisdom to the man who toppled empires. That's the visual we're chasing, so take a deep breath. Here we go. Yelü Chucai was born in 1190 into a Khitan family that had once ruled parts of northern China. By the time he came along, the Liao dynasty was ancient history, and Khitan identity was fading into the mosaic of people under Jin rule. From an early age, Chucai, or Yelü the Talented, as his name roughly translates, showed a knack for learning. He devoured poetry, history, philosophy. While his peers might have been dreaming of military glory, Chucai was scribbling commentaries on Confucius. I mean, who does that when the world's on fire? But that intellectual spark would become his greatest weapon. Fast forward to 1221. Genghis Khan, after raising the Khwarezmian Empire and teaching the world the true meaning of scorched earth, is rolling through northern China. His advisors tell him to just kill everyone and move on. It's fast, it's brutal, but it's quick. Into this maelstrom steps Yelü Chucai. He somehow secures an audience, crazy, right? And decides to pitch a radically different plan. "Your Majesty," he says, "there is value in these people. Let them live, tax them, and our empire will grow even richer." Cue the raised eyebrows in the tent. Now, here's where it gets weird. The story goes that Chucai stood rock solid as Genghis's lieutenants roared for blood. He argued that cultivating agriculture, administering justice, and collecting revenue would do more to sustain the empire than endless slaughter. And, this is the mind-blowing part, Genghis listened. Instead of burning captured towns to cinders, he ordered them spared. Census rolls were drawn up, taxes were imposed. Suddenly, the Mongol machine had a bureaucratic backbone. I didn't expect this either. This wasn't just paperwork for paperwork's sake. It changed lives. Farmers were allowed to return to their fields rather than flee the horizon in terror. Merchants reopened caravans, reconnecting Silk Road routes that had sputtered under the thunder of hooves. Grain shipments stabilized the army's supply lines. Sure, it sounds dry, but picture it like this. One day, you're running for your life. The next, you're paying a modest levy and wondering if maybe, just maybe, life under Mongol rule isn't the apocalypse you feared. That pivot? That's Chucai's doing. But he didn't stop at taxes. He introduced policies against wanton destruction of irrigation works and granaries. Because what's the point of conquering a region if it can't feed itself? He convinced Genghis to respect local customs to some degree, using familiar legal frameworks instead of arbitrary brutality. And every step of the way, he peppered his speeches with Confucian quotes about benevolence and righteousness. Think about that. In a world where the loudest voice was "kill them all," Chucai whispered, "Let's talk this through." Talk about crazy courage. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some Mongol generals scoffed at the notion of treating conquered people like, well, people. They wanted forced labor, they wanted terror, they wanted to break spirits. But Chucai had earned Genghis's personal respect. And when your boss is the most powerful man on earth, you get some leverage. Even if you're the only guy in the room without a bow. When Genghis died in 1227, you might have guessed our scholar lost his champion. Surprise, he didn't. Ogedei Khan, Genghis's third son and successor, also recognized Chucai's value. He kept him on as chief advisor. Now it's one thing to serve the conqueror, it's another to navigate the palace politics of a freshly minted Khagan who's juggling rival tribes, family feuds, and his own plans. Yet Chucai managed to thrive, pushing forward administrative reforms that would evolve into the Yuan dynasty's civil service. I'm telling you, this guy was the original bureaucratic influencer. Picture a dusty hall in Karakoram, the Mongol capital, where clerks in pell-mell scribble mountain after mountain of documents. That's Chucai's legacy, turning the Mongol elite into reluctant fans of red tape. He even worked to integrate Confucian scholars into the administration. Okay, quick check-in. If you thought medieval history was all about knights and jousts, welcome to the real world, where a scholar changes the course of an empire with a pen. But we're just scratching the surface. Back to the story. Chucai also wrote extensively letters, memorials, essays, arguing for justice, humane treatment, even education for the Mongol princes. In one famous petition, he lamented that the grandsons of Genghis might grow up illiterate if they followed only the ways of the steppe. He asked for schools, tutors, texts. The idea that Mongol princes should memorize the analects? That's Yelü Chucai planting seeds in frozen soil. Crazy to imagine a horse lord reciting Confucius, right? Definitely not what Hollywood shows. But real history is full of delicious twists. As he aged, Chucai's influence waxed and waned. He negotiated treaties, moderated taxes during famines, and even handled diplomatic missions to southern Song China. Every time someone said, "We must crush them," he'd whisper, "Or we could govern them." And every time he whispered, Mongol policy tilted a little toward administration and away from apocalypse. By the time he passed away in 1244, Chucai had built structures, literal and bureaucratic, that outlived him. His civil codes and tax systems formed the backbone of the Yuan dynasty's governance. Centuries later, Chinese historians looked back and credited him as the man who humanized Mongol rule and laid foundations for stability.
And yet, how many of us learned his name in school?
That's why we're here, to spotlight the underdog who transformed a terror empire into an administrative powerhouse. So what's the takeaway? Sometimes the sharpest swords aren't forged of steel, they're made of words. Yelü Chucai reminds us that intellect and compassion can survive, even thrive, in the harshest environments. He teaches that change often comes from the most unexpected voices, like a Khitan scholar advising Mongol conquerors. And he shows us that history isn't just battles and kingship, it's ideas taking root in unlikely soil and reshaping worlds. Feeling inspired? Here's a cliffhanger for you. What might our world look like if more people channeled their inner Chucai, choosing dialogue over destruction? Let me know in the comments your real-life examples of diplomacy winning out over chaos. If this trip into the wild side of medieval bureaucracy blew your mind, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that flip history on its head. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Alright, that's a wrap on Yelü Chucai, the man who put ink before iron, mercy before massacre, and left a legacy written in scrolls, not just scorched earth. In tandem with court duties, Zhao authored The Lessons for Women, a guidebook on female comportment, ethics, and domestic management. Far from a superficial treatise on etiquette, her text laid out principles for cultivating filial piety, maintaining household harmony, and exercising moral influence over one's husband and children. Some modern readers balk at its prescriptions, advice on submissiveness or roles within the family, but in context it granted women an intellectual framework to wield subtle political power. Her words became touchstones for Confucian womanhood, studied for centuries by daughters of elite families. Court life itself was a delicate dance of alliances and rivalries. Within the Forbidden City's courtyard, lacquered columns rose like silent sentinels, while eunuchs carried messages cloaked in silk pouches. Zhao navigated this labyrinthine world deftly, her reputation for scholarship shielding her from the worst intrigues. Yet she was far from aloof. Correspondence reveals poetic letters exchanged with Han dignitaries, expressions of sympathy on matters of grief and grief counsel, and even pointed critiques of tax policies that harmed peasant families. Her pen spoke for the voiceless as much as for the emperors. A lesser-known facet of her legacy lies in standardizing Chinese characters. During her era, scripts varied widely. Regional strokes diverged and cursive forms confounded learners. Zhao codified orthographic rules, precise stroke order, proportional character structure, and consistent radical placement. Calligraphy schools still trace their lineage to her conventions, and textbooks of East Asia owe her meticulous system for teaching writing. In every classroom where Chinese is taught today, echoes of Zhao's hand guide the student's brush. The familial thread remains central. Zhao's grief at her brother Bangu's death found eloquent expression in elegiac poetry, lines drenched in sorrow, yet suffused with philosophical reflection on life's impermanence. Imagery of withering chrysanthemums and autumn winds carries the weight of her loss, transforming personal tribulation into universal meditation. These verses are among the earliest extant works by a Chinese woman, a testament to her literary prowess and emotional depth.
Historians have pieced together anecdotes that reveal her unflinching confidence. One tale recounts her discreet correction of the emperor's calligraphy, politely adjusting a misplaced stroke in a draft, then stepping back while the sovereign acknowledged her expertise without hesitation. The story encapsulates her singular blend of humility and authority, a scholar unwavering in pursuit of accuracy, yet ever mindful of decorum.
Zhao's role in foreign policy consultations also surfaces in fragmentary records. As the Han court faced recurring raids by the Xiongnu nomads, envoys sought her insights on diplomatic overtures and treaty language. She drafted dispatches that balanced firmness with conciliation, advocating both strategic marriages and measured tributes. In effect, she operated as an early diplomat, her pen shaping alliances and preserving fragile peace. The arc of her life converged in her later years, as she witnessed the court's shifting fortunes. She served under Emperor He, whose capricious reign tested her resilience. Even as factional strife threatened senior ministers, Zhao's reputation kept her at the center of intellectual life. She continued teaching, writing marginalia on ancestral rituals, and mentoring young scholars, male and female alike. When she passed in 116 AD, mourners gathered in the temple courtyard, offering incense and reciting lines from her own poetry. In the centuries that followed, her memory dimmed in the Western world, obscured by patriarchal retellings that sidelined women's contributions. Yet within China, her writings endured. Rediscovered by Qing-era scholars, her lessons for women became required reading in academies. Modern feminist historians celebrate Zhao as a pioneering intellectual, whose works provide rare windows into women's lives in antiquity. Imagine unearthing one of her original scrolls today. The lustrous silk frayed at the edges, characters faint but legible, the ink a muted echo of the scholar's brush. In each stroke lies not just the recounting of events, but a gentle challenge to the conventions of her age, a reminder that history is written by those bold enough to claim the pen. Her life raises enduring questions about voice and authority. When the chronicles of empires bear only one perspective, how many stories remain untold? Ban Zhao's intervention reminds us that every narrative is incomplete until all voices are heard. Her legacy reverberates in classrooms, libraries, and digital archives, urging us to seek out the hidden figures whose courage reshapes our collective memory. In the final analysis, Ban Zhao was more than a court scholar or historian. She was a cultural bridge, connecting the moral philosophy of the classics with the lived realities of palace women, blending the precision of record-keeping with the lyricism of poetry, and transmuting personal grief into universal insight. Her life demonstrates that scholarship need not be divorced from empathy, that power can be wielded with humility, and that the quiet stroke of a brush sometimes wields more influence than the clang of a sword.